I need you to stay with me for this one. I know that's a strange thing to say before a story even begins, but I'm about to tell you something I kept locked inside for 9 years. Something I never said out loud to another person. Not to my doctor, not to my imam, not to anyone who loved me. And I need to know you're still here before I say it. So if something inside you brought you to this video today, stay. Because what I'm about to tell you is not a sermon, it is not a lesson, it is just what happened. In a hallway, before dawn, when everything I believed about love, about God, about myself, cracked open. My name is Yusuf. I was 34 years old when my son nearly died. Before that morning in the hallway, I want you to understand who I was. Not who I am now, who I was then. Because the story doesn't make sense unless you see it clearly. I lost my wife the night my son was born. Her name was Amira. She was 29. The delivery went wrong fast, and there was nothing the doctors could do. Or that's what they told me. And I spent years deciding whether I believed them. My son came into the world the same moment she left it. I held him in the hospital room with her body still warm on the other side of a curtain, and I made a decision without even realizing I was making it. I decided I would never let anything be taken from me again. I was raised Muslim, not by habit or family pressure, but by belief. I knew the prayers. I recited them. I meant them, or I thought I meant them. But after Amira died, my faith became something harder than faith. It became armor. Every prayer became a wall I built between myself and whatever force I thought had taken her. I believed in God, but I did not trust Him. I obeyed because I feared what would happen if I didn't, not because I felt loved. My son's name is Ibrahim. I named him after the Prophet who was asked to give up the thing he loved most. I don't know why I chose that name. Maybe I already knew something I wasn't ready to face. For 6 years I raised Ibrahim alone. I refused help, not because I didn't need it, because needing it meant being vulnerable to someone who could eventually leave. Every offer of assistance felt like a setup, a kindness with a price attached to the back of it. I paid my own bills, cooked my own meals, took Ibrahim to school myself, picked him up myself, sat with him at night when he had bad dreams by myself. Control became my religion before Islam ever was. And beneath all of it, beneath every decision, every refusal, every prayer said through gritted teeth, lived one belief I never said out loud but never stopped thinking. Love always comes with an agenda. Ibrahim got sick in October. It started with a fever that wouldn't break. By the second night he stopped responding normally, and I drove to the hospital at 2 in the morning, with him limp in the back seat, talking to him the entire way, telling him to stay awake, stay with me, stay with me. They admitted him to the pediatric intensive care unit within the hour. I remember the hallway the first time I walked through it. Long, white tile that reflected the fluorescent lights overhead in pale blue. The smell was antiseptic, and underneath that, old coffee. Machines beeped behind closed doors in rhythms that didn't match each other. Families sat against walls with their coats pulled tight and their eyes open but not really seeing anything. Everyone in that hallway was holding the same thing, the same terrible waiting. I refused to sit. I paced, back and forth. 19 steps one direction, turn, 19 steps back. I counted because counting kept the other thoughts from moving in. A nurse named Sandra offered me a blanket. I told her I was fine. She offered again an hour later with coffee. I told her I didn't want it. She came back a third time and I said, louder than I should have, I said I don't need anything. Please stop asking. She didn't flinch. She just nodded and walked back down the hallway. That should have told me something about her. It didn't. Not then. The volunteers came on the third day. A group of them. Church volunteers, I could tell by the small logo on their yellow vests and the way they carried themselves. Gentle but purposeful. like people who had trained for kindness. They came through the ward pushing a cart with sandwiches and juice and small packets of crackers. They offered to everyone. They didn't ask who believed what. They didn't check religion before they handed you a bottle of water. When one of them stopped beside me and held out a sandwich wrapped in white paper, I looked at her and said, "I know what you're doing." She looked confused. "I'm just offering you lunch." "No," I said. "You're building trust so you can tell me something later. That's how this works." She didn't argue. She didn't try to convince me I was wrong. She just left the sandwich on the empty chair beside me and moved on to the next family. I stared at that sandwich for 40 minutes. I did not touch it. I left it there until someone else took it. That was day 3. On day 5, a pastor came. He was older, maybe 60, with a quiet face and worn shoes that suggested he spent a lot of time on his feet. He introduced himself as Pastor Ellis. He did not carry a Bible. He did not open with a prayer. He sat down in the chair 2 seats away from me and said, "I'm not here to talk. I just thought you might not want to be alone." I looked at him. I don't need company from someone trying to save my soul. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm not here about your soul. I'm just here." "Then go be here somewhere else," I said. He stood up, not angrily, slowly, the way tired people stand, and he walked away without another word. I watched him go down the hallway and stop at another family, a young mother sitting on the floor with her knees pulled to her chest, and he just sat down beside her on the floor. No speech, no Bible, just present. Something moved in my chest when I saw that, something small and uncomfortable that I immediately shut down. I didn't have room for it. Day 7, Ibrahim's condition worsened. The doctor came out with an expression I recognized from the night Amira died. Controlled, careful, the face of someone about to deliver information that will change everything. He told me Ibrahim's organs were under stress, that they were watching his kidneys closely, that the next 48 hours were important. I went back to the hallway and I sat down, for the first time. I just sat. That same night, a family 3 rooms down received good news. I could hear it through the wall, the sound of crying that switches in an instant from grief into relief, laughter breaking through tears, footsteps rushing, a mother saying "thank you, thank you, thank you," over and over in a voice that kept cracking. I stood up from my chair. I walked to the nurse's station and I said flatly, "It's difficult to maintain composure when other patients are celebrating in a shared space." The nurse looked at me. "Sir, their child just came off the ventilator." "I understand," I said. "So I'm simply pointing out that not everyone here has good news." She didn't respond. She wrote something in her clipboard, and I walked back to my chair and sat down and hated myself so thoroughly and completely for what I had just done that I could not look at another person for the rest of that night. I did not apologize. I didn't know how. The janitor came on day 9. He was a small man, older, with a name tag that said Marcus. He was mopping the floor beside the water fountain when he looked up and saw me standing there, staring at nothing. He leaned on his mop and said, very simply, "Don't lose hope, brother. I've seen the hard ones turn around." I looked at him and said, "You mop floors. You're not a doctor." He nodded slowly. He didn't look hurt. He just went back to mopping. I got my water and walked back to Ibrahim's room. That moment stayed with me in a way I didn't understand yet, not because of what I said, because of how he received it. He didn't need me to be grateful. He didn't need me to validate what he said. He offered it because he had something to give, and he gave it, and my rejection didn't take anything from him. I had never operated that way in my life. By the second week, the anger stopped working. That's the only way I can explain it. I had been running on anger since Amira died, using it the way a car uses fuel. It moved me forward. It kept the grief from swallowing me whole. But somewhere in the middle of that second week, I argued with a nurse about Ibrahim's IV positioning, and when she quietly corrected me using medical terms I didn't understand, I felt nothing afterward. Not satisfaction, not the tight relief that usually followed when I'd pushed back and stayed in control. Just empty. I sat in the plastic chair outside Ibrahim's room, and the hallway hummed around me, and I felt like a machine running with no power source. Still making the motions, still breathing, still functioning, but nothing inside generating the force to keep going. My prayers became words, just words. I said them because I always said them. I moved through the positions because I always moved through them. But there was no contact anymore, nothing reaching upward, nothing coming back down, just me reciting syllables into a ceiling I no longer believed anything was behind. I did not tell anyone this. I didn't have anyone to tell. Somewhere in the third week I stopped pacing. I didn't decide to stop. It just happened. I sat more. I moved less. I stopped looking for things to correct. A volunteer bumped into me near the elevator, and I said, "No problem." It came out naturally. I didn't plan it. One morning, an elderly man named Bernard, who had been in the waiting room since before I arrived, sat down beside me. His granddaughter was in the ward. He had a kind face and tired eyes, and he didn't try to start a conversation. He just sat the way people sit when they've given up trying to manage time. After a long while he said, "You're quieter now." I looked at him. "What? You? You've been quieter the past few days. When you first came you were—" He paused, searching for the word. "Sharper." "I'm tired," I said. He nodded like he understood. But I heard myself say it and I knew it wasn't true. Or it wasn't only true. Something had gone out of me. Some edge I had sharpened for 6 years was dulling on its own, and I didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. I went home that night for the first time to sleep in my own bed. I lay down in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought, I don't know what I am anymore without the fight. It was the morning of day 22. The nurses had been insisting for days that I eat a real meal. Sandra in particular had become quietly persistent in a way I had stopped resisting. She put her hand on my arm one morning and said, "Yusuf, the machine doesn't run without fuel. Just go get coffee. We are right here, 10 minutes. I went. The coffee machine was at the far end of the hallway, past the waiting area, near the double doors that led to the stairwell. I walked down there slowly. The floor was polished and pale and reflected the fluorescent lights above in long streaks. My shoes made a quiet sound with every step. The hall was nearly empty this early. The families who had been sleeping against the walls were now in chairs. One child somewhere was crying softly, and then stopped. I got my coffee, I turned to walk back, and he was there. At the far end of the hallway, Ibrahim, standing. He was wearing his hospital gown, the pale green one with the small ties at the back. His feet were bare on the tile. His hair was loose the way it got in the morning when he hadn't brushed it. He looked healthy. He looked completely, impossibly, entirely healthy. No tubes, no pallor. Just my son, standing at the end of a hospital hallway at dawn, watching me. I did not move. The coffee was in my hand and I did not move. My chest stopped for a moment, not metaphorically. It actually stopped. 1 beat, 2. Then it came back too fast, too hard, pressing against the inside of my ribs like it was trying to leave my body entirely. Ibrahim looked at me the way children look at something they have already understood and are waiting for the adult to catch up with. Calm, patient, not afraid. He stood there in that pale green gown on that white tile with the blue light overhead, and he looked directly into my eyes. And then he spoke. "Jesus stayed because you wouldn't leave me." 7 words. He said them the way he said everything, simply, clearly, with no drama attached to them, as if they were just true, and truth didn't require performance. Then he smiled, the real smile, the one that went all the way up into his eyes, the one that was Amira's smile living on in a different face. He turned, and he walked around the corner at the end of the hallway. I ran. I don't remember deciding to run. I was just running. Coffee gone. Somewhere on the floor behind me. My shoes hitting the tile hard and fast, and the sound echoing off the walls as I rounded the corner and stopped. Empty. A storage closet. A cart of folded linens. Fluorescent light humming, nothing else. I stood there. My breath was loud. My hands were shaking. I pressed my palm flat against the wall and felt the cold tile and tried to understand what my body had just told my mind. There was no one there. Ibrahim was in his room. I knew that. I had left him there 20 minutes ago, connected to monitors that would have screamed if he moved. He was there. His body was there. But he had been here. I walked back to his room. I stood in the doorway and looked at him lying still in the bed, with the IV in his arm, and the monitors beeping their steady, slow rhythm. His chest rose. It fell. I sat down in the chair beside his bed, and I did not tell anyone what I had seen. I told myself it was the sleep deprivation, the stress, 22 days without proper rest. The mind does things under that kind of pressure. I had heard that. I believed that. I said it to myself several times. I almost believed it, but the words wouldn't leave. 7 words don't take up much space in theory, but these ones had weight. They sat in a room inside my mind and they didn't move. I would be eating and they would surface. I would be watching Ibrahim sleep and there they would be again. Jesus stayed because you wouldn't leave me. I needed it to have a practical explanation. I needed that more than almost anything. So I asked Sandra, carefully, whether Ibrahim had ever left his room. She looked at me with concern and said no, not once, not even shifted positions in bed without help. I asked another nurse, same answer. I found the charge nurse and asked about the security footage for that hallway. She was patient with me. She reviewed it herself. She came back and told me no child matching Ibrahim's description appeared in that hallway during the time frame I described. No one, just me, walking to the coffee machine and walking back. I sat with that information for a long time. I still told no one what I had seen, but I stopped trying to solve it. I couldn't solve it. I had looked at it from every angle I could find, and the edges didn't meet. There was no explanation that made the shape of what happened fit neatly into something I already knew. And then, slowly, in a way I didn't notice at first, I started watching the volunteers differently. Not suspiciously, just watching. The woman who had left the sandwich on the chair beside me. I saw her 3 days later sitting on the floor beside a grandmother who didn't speak English, holding the woman's hand and not speaking either, just holding. Pastor Ellis, who I had dismissed with one sentence, was there again on a Tuesday morning, sitting on the floor next to a different family. Not preaching, just present. The janitor Marcus passed me in the hallway and said, "How you doing today?" And this time I said, "Better. Thank you." And I meant it. Something was shifting. I couldn't name it yet, but it was moving. The weeks passed. Ibrahim improved slowly. One organ at a time, the numbers came back. The doctors used words like cautiously optimistic. His kidneys stabilized. His fever broke for good on a Thursday morning, and I sat beside his bed, and for the first time in 23 days, I let myself cry, not in front of anyone, after the nurses left. Just me and Ibrahim's sleeping face, and the sound of the monitors that were now reading normal, and the light coming through the window. I accepted a meal from the volunteers that week. A woman named Grace set it down beside me, and I said, "Thank you, Grace." She smiled, like I had given her something instead of the other way around. I started thanking the nurses, not formally, just genuinely. Sandra, The night nurse whose name I had never bothered to learn. Marcus, same name as the janitor. That struck me. I thanked them. An older father named Joseph had been in the ward as long as I had. His daughter was still critical. I had never once asked about her. One morning I sat down beside him and I said, "How is she today?" He looked at me like he wasn't sure I was talking to him. Then his eyes filled and he told me. We sat there for an hour. I mostly listened. When I walked back to Ibrahim's room, something in my chest felt different. Not fixed, not healed, but open. Like a window that had been painted shut for years and someone had finally worked it loose enough to let a little air move through. One night, late, Ibrahim finally asleep and the ward quiet, I sat in the dark beside his bed and tried to pray. Not from the routine, not from the wall I had built, just tried to reach upward with whatever I had left. And in the middle of the quiet, not a voice exactly, but something as clear as a voice, moving through the silence, like it had always been there. You have never carried him alone. No vision, no light, no dramatic sign, just those words. And underneath them, settling into my body like warm water, peace, the real kind. Not the absence of fear, not distraction from pain. Something underneath both of those things. Something that had been there the whole time and I had been standing on top of it without knowing. I stayed in the dark for a long time. When I finally moved, I realized I was not the same person who had walked into this hospital 20-some days ago. I didn't know yet what I was becoming, but I knew what I was not. I want to be honest about what happened after. Because if I tell you I found peace and everything became simple, I am lying to you. And you deserve the truth more than you deserve a tidy ending. The conversion, following Jesus, which is what I eventually understood was happening to me, did not erase the grief. Amira was still gone. I still woke up some mornings and reached for her before my eyes opened and then remembered. That pain didn't receive a miracle. It stayed. Ibrahim got sick again the following year, not as serious. But when the fever climbed and I sat in the same waiting room, every single old fear flooded back in. Every old instinct to grab control and refuse help and build the wall. I sat in that plastic chair and I had to choose, not feel but choose, to open my hands instead of close them. Some days the old anger came back. Someone would dismiss me or misunderstand me or make an assumption, and I would feel that familiar heat move up through my chest and I would think, there it is. There's the person I used to be, knocking, and I had to choose again whether to let him in. Several of my relatives stopped speaking to me. That is the honest version. When they understood I was following Jesus, some of them did not know how to hold that alongside who they had known me to be. Some tried, some didn't. Losing those relationships, sitting across a dinner table from people who loved me and feeling the wall between us, hurt in a way I didn't expect and wasn't entirely prepared for. I don't tell you this to make the story dramatic. I tell you because what happened to me was real, and real things have real costs, and I want you to know I'm not standing here pretending otherwise. But I cannot deny what happened in that hallway. I cannot deny the voice in the dark. I cannot deny that something changed in me that I did not manufacture and could not reverse. Months after Ibrahim was discharged, when he was home and healthy and running through the apartment like nothing had ever happened, I went back. I told myself I needed to close something, return to the place where the story happened, and stand in it once more. I walked into the hospital and down the hallway. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Different time of day, different light. The floor was the same. The smell was the same. I stood where I had stood with the coffee in my hand and looked down to the far end. Empty hallway. Nothing. I asked at the nurses' station, different nurses, different faces, if any of them knew of a child who had been seen wandering this hallway late at night around 3 months ago. A boy, 6 years old, hospital gown, bare feet. They didn't know. I asked if I could speak with someone from security about footage from that period. The woman at the desk was kind but clear. Records from 3 months ago were no longer available for review without a formal request, and without a specific incident on file, there was nothing to pull. I stood there and I knew I was not going to find what I had come looking for. Not because it wasn't real, because it was not the kind of thing that leaves footprints. I walked slowly to the end of the hallway, rounded the corner where Ibrahim had turned. The storage closet was still there, the cart of linens, the fluorescent hum. I stood in that space for a moment. Then I walked back. On my way out, I passed the waiting area, a row of plastic chairs along the wall, a low table with magazines no one was reading. I had sat in those chairs for weeks. I had paced past them dozens of times. I almost didn't see it. Beneath one of the chairs, partially pushed against the wall, a small toy car. Red. The kind children carry everywhere and set down in random places and forget. It had not been there on my worst nights in this hallway. I was certain of that, the way you are certain of a space you have occupied for weeks. I crouched down and looked at it without picking it up. I don't know how long I stayed there. Long enough for the hallway to get quieter around me. Long enough for something to settle inside my chest that I did not try to name. Then I stood up. I left the toy car where it was. I walked toward the hospital entrance. Through the automatic doors I could see people arriving. A man helping an elderly woman out of a car. A young couple walking fast, the woman holding her stomach. A mother carrying a child wrapped in a blanket, moving with the particular urgency of someone who has been afraid for several hours. 6 months ago I would have walked past all of them, not out of cruelty, out of emptiness. You cannot give from a place that has nothing left. But I walked toward the doors, not away from the suffering, toward it, because someone had done that for me. In a hallway before dawn with 7 words that made no logical sense and every spiritual sense, something had walked toward me when I had given it every reason to leave, had stayed beside a hospital bed while I refused help, rejected kindness, pushed away every hand that reached toward me, had waited, not with conditions, not with an agenda, just stayed. I walk toward those doors now, because I believe what I could not have told you 3 years ago, that love is the one thing that does not always come with a cost, that sometimes it comes because it is simply, stubbornly, unmovably true. I'm going to ask you something before I go. If you are carrying something right now that you haven't said out loud to anyone, something heavy, something that keeps you awake, something you have been holding alone for longer than you should have, I want you to put it in the comments below this video. Not for me, for whoever else is reading those comments right now. Someone in a hallway just like mine, someone who needs to see that they are not the only one carrying this particular weight. You don't have to explain the whole story, you can just name it, one sentence. And those of us who are here will pray with you. That's what this community is. That's the only thing I want it to be. If these stories mean something to you, if you want to keep hearing them, I would be grateful if you stayed. Subscribe. Not because the numbers matter. Because the more people stay in this room, the more people like you find it when they need it most. There are more testimonies, more hallways, more moments that made no sense until they made every sense. Stay if you want to hear them. I'll be here.